driven pretty far away to attend this, and it is most sincerely heartfelt. Two, can everybody in the back hear me okay? Okay, want to make sure. I also don't want to blow anybody's ears out. Look, we are here today because of you, and that is not an understatement. Congress, the executive branch, new administrations, politics aside, they're listening to you. They're listening to every word you have to say. When you call up Congress, you send a letter, or you talk to somebody and it winds up making it in the news that this topic is being followed seriously, it's because of you, not because of me. I'm one voice. You have created truly a movement, and it is my profound privilege to be with you here this evening. So before we get going, I want to thank, first of all, the Texas Theater and the staff for having us in this beautiful historic venue. Secondly, if you are or were a teacher, raise your hand. Fantastic. Keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. If you are or were either a nurse or a first responder or paramedic, raise your hand. Keep them up. If you were either in the military or were or now or law enforcement, raise your hand, please. Thank you, each and every one of you for your service. It is profoundly appreciated. Thank you. You are true heroes. And I want to thank each and every one of you. Last but not least, I'm honored this evening, not only because of you all being here, but I'm going to share a personal story with you because there's somebody in the audience right now who has been, we'll say, a colleague of mine. About 22 years ago, actually, like now, 22 years ago, I was on a plane coming from a secret base called Kashyyykanabad in Uzbekistan, K2. And this is right on the heels of 9/11. And we were going into war. And America just didn't know it yet. But we were heading off on a C-130 into a place called Kandahar in Afghanistan. And this individual deployed with me. And it was a profound moment because I learned, talking to him over and over again, I learned a lot about myself. And when the troops, keep in mind this is combat, you got rockets and mortars going all around you and combat operations during the day and detainees coming in at night. Pretty stressful environment. He would take out his guitar and he would play music that we all remembered, reminded us of home. He'd play Bon Jovi and other songs that, for that very brief moment in time, we were no longer in combat. We were no longer in Afghanistan or Kandahar. We were home. We were home with our friends and our families, and we had a chance to just be normal. And so that individual later wound up to continue to serve his country and his citizens and became a police officer. And he's here with us this evening. So what I'd like to do is a round of applause for Officer Brian Kelly, who's with us here this evening. Brian, can you please stand up? He's on the mezzanine. We owe you a great deal, my friend. Thank you. So, all right, are we ready to go? All right, good times, guys. We got a lot of stuff to cover, and then we're going to take some questions afterwards, all right? So here we go. And by the way, this is interactive. There will be a quiz on some of this, so pay attention. So I'm going to show you a picture here. What I want you to do is think about what maybe these folks have in common. Take a look. These are folks that are separated by geography, continents in some cases. They're separated by sex, religion, culture, race. What do these folks have in common? Other than what someone told me the last show, that they're all dead. Yes, I know. Yes, they are all deceased. I know. Okay, engineers, not bad. Visionaries. There you go. In fact, they challenged the status quo at a time when everybody, whether it was science or religion or governments, said that they were wrong. They challenged the status quo, and you know what? They were right. So, with that said, for some of my friends and colleagues that are in the academic and scientific community, I'd like to remind them of this. Right? Trust the science. What does that mean? No, actually challenge the science. That's how you do science. So just as a little reminder. So UAPs and artificial intelligence. I was having a conversation with some folks earlier this evening over dinner, and one of the individuals who's here with us this evening, I won't say who he is, I won't call him out and embarrass him, but he is very interested in artificial intelligence, and he's also a former attorney, very logic-minded, tends to be what we call a healthy skeptic. And we were talking a little about artificial intelligence. So what I want to do is demonstrate for you the power of artificial intelligence we have now for UAPs in this topic. Never in the history of our species have we ever been at a place and time where we have the technology that we have today. When I was in school, if I wanted to learn something, I'd go to the high school library, pull out an old encyclopedia that's probably 20 years old, and I would have to try to learn from that. Now, in the palm of your hands, you have access to the world, all the history, all the stories, everything, right? So we can now leverage this technology, this wonderful blessing in automation we call artificial intelligence. So what does that look like with regard to UAP? Well, colleagues of mine have developed something, and I'm going to show you an example of what artificial intelligence can do. And it's important, because let me preface, when you go to Congress or you go to a new executive leader or a cabinet member and you're going to talk about a topic like UFOs, you've got to have your information correct. And by the way, this is a lesson for me too, for everybody. So we're going to go down this rabbit hole for just a little bit and show you the limitations and capabilities of artificial intelligence. Now I'm going to talk about a case study. This is a video that was taken, probably shouldn't have been because it was in restricted U.S. territory. It was on a military installation somewhere out west, I won't say where, and an officer, an Army 04 major officer, was coming out of an appointment and noticed out on the horizon what he described as being a black disc, a black saucer hovering in the distance. And so he took out his cell phone and he actually recorded it. Again, he probably shouldn't have, so I'm going to try to protect his identity here. But on the left, or I'm sorry, on your left, is the facts behind the video. And so I'm going to play the video very shortly. Because of the compression of the video, it comes across kind of blurry, but you'll notice when he zooms in, you'll kind of see what looks like some sort of black object out there. So when you freeze the camera, let's see if we can do that. Let's see if we can get out of this. There we go.
Whoa.
Right? Whoa. However, imagine if this got loose in the wild on social media, and for the next 30 years, people will be talking about the secret black flying saucer that's on the military base. So we decided to use artificial intelligence. And the first thing artificial intelligence recognizes is that there are some sort of anomalies, pixelation anomalies, in the background. Now, these pixelation anomalies they're not bad or they're not fake. It's just these are objects in the background that don't match the geometry of the natural environment in front. Furthermore, let's see this. There we go. It also noticed something that the human eye can't pick up. What looked like some sort of support or landing gear or struts coming from the sides of this black disc. So then we asked the artificial intelligence to tell us, all right, what's your best guess of what's in the background? Okay, pretty impressive. A C-17 Globemaster in the background, an F-35 and two other aircraft whose tails are passing. So what we're probably looking at is a flight line on a military base, active air operations. Okay, so then we asked the artificial intelligence, what do you see here? Yep, there's definitely something coming from the edge of this flying saucer looking thing. So then we asked AI to tell us what the object was. That's it. That's right. It's a U.S. Army tent with the sides rolled up, olive green. Not, most definitely, a UFO. So I show this because this is important. We have to be our own worst critics. Let me give you another example. About 3 weeks ago, I presented a picture that was provided to me from somebody in the intelligence community about 2 years ago. And I decided I would show it because I talked to him and like, hey man, we got to figure this out. He's like, well, we've tried, we can't figure it out. 2 days. 2 days, you did. Right? So we're going to show that real quick. This was a photo that I was given, and supposedly it was taken in Romania. Supposedly it was taken by the U.S. Embassy, and supposedly it shows a UFO. Wow, okay, looks impressive. Guess what? Wrong. It's not. In fact, it's probably the reflection of a chandelier inside of a hotel window. That's right. That's right. And so the question is asked, how could we get it wrong? Well, this is what I've always been saying. Let's take this conversation to the people, okay? You folks are smart. There are some really savvy people out there. Let's get you involved in that conversation. Let's release some of these photos and videos that we know are there because I've personally seen them. And let's take it to the people. This is something that I think should be used and should be leveraged. And let's face it, again, in 2 days, you were able to figure out what our folks couldn't do in 2 years. That's true. So I wanted to just highlight that before we go into the rest of the talk here. The real question is, why was I provided that photograph? Well, first and foremost, I should have vetted it better. But why? And well, it's either one of two things, in my opinion. Either incompetence or deliberate effort to misinform and to sidetrack. I haven't figured out yet which one it is. Hopefully, well, they're both bad scenarios, aren't they? Right? Both incompetence and deliberate misinformation. Anyways, take it to the streets, folks. This is what I've been telling Congress. This is what I've been telling Arrow. If you can't figure it out, let the public have it. Let them have at it. All right, so here's your first quiz. Thinking outside the box, right? Something we always hear. It sounds kind of cliche, really. What I want you to do for just a moment is go ahead and, in your head, name a type of ship. Think of a ship, okay? So, how many of you, no, don't put your hands up. How many of you were thinking to yourself a sailing ship or a cruise ship, right? So if you were, give yourself a D. How about an airship, a dirigible, a blimp, right? Again, you don't have to put your hands up, but how many of you thought of that? And if you were thinking of that, give yourself a C. And of course, a spaceship, starship, right? Star Trek, space shuttle. How many of you thought about that? I know probably a lot of you were thinking about that. Give yourself a B. Now, how many of you thought of censorship and friendship, right? I didn't tell you what type of ship, did I? You just naturally went there. And so the point of this is that when we're talking about the topic of UAP, we really have to force ourselves to think about a topic in ways that we're not used to thinking about, okay? And it's hard because we're human beings. We're kind of pre-wired to think in patterns and whatnot. And when it comes to this topic, we really, really, really have to try to do a better job and not go down that road. We have to remain objective and open-minded. We really need to try to avoid that temptation of preconceived notions, ideas, and narratives. So UAPs and stigma. We always talk about stigma and taboo as being one of the primary, and by the way, Congress said the same thing, as one of the primary, and even Arrow, believe it or not, 2 days ago, one of the things they actually said that was right, that stigma and taboo is probably one of the greatest challenges we have when talking about this topic, because we have spent so many decades artificially placing, and in some cases state-sponsored, stigma on this topic. It almost made it impossible to talk about. The moment you say UFOs, People think of tinfoil hats and Elvis on the mothership and things like that, right? And it's not helpful to the conversation. It's not. So let's talk about stigma and taboo. Para. Para is a prefix. We use it in the English language. It's actually derived from the Latin language. It means above or beside. Here's the definition, Merriam-Webster. And we use it all the time to describe things. So let's go through a real quick exercise here. Parachute, right? If you're a military guy like me, or maybe Brian, you think of something that helps you hit the ground with a thump and not a thud, and it's something that's usually positive. That's what a parachute is, right? That's what we think of. And if I say to you the word paramedic, what do you think of? Well, a medical professional sitting above or beside you, trying to help you, and we think of that. Something that is generally positive. Okay? It's just a word, para. Now if I say paranormal, exactly. You just proved my point. Exactly. I will submit to you that there is absolutely no difference between the word parachute and paramedic and paranormal, other than the stigma that we have ascribed to it. Most people, when you say paranormal, they look at you and they maybe cock their head sideways and maybe smile like, what do you mean paranormal? Everything in science, by definition, is paranormal until it becomes normal, folks. Cell phone, my laptop, Wi-Fi, all those were concepts that were once previously considered paranormal, and now they're just normal. Remember, today's technology is yesterday's miracle, right? So let's go through some examples, right? When we say paranormal, that's what we think of. Ouija boards and things like that. Things that are out of the norm, things that don't really comport to our general understanding of how life and reality should be. So let's go through some concepts once considered paranormal. So things like a solar eclipse, comets, other type of celestial events, certainly considered paranormal by many of the cultures here for many, many years. In fact, to some degree, in some societies, it's still an omen, a harbinger, if you will, of something bad to happen, perhaps. In reality, it's just a natural event. Photography. Yanomami tribe in Brazil, headhunters, took their picture. They thought you were stealing their soul. Of course, you can see our friend in the background with a bow and arrow. Doesn't look very happy, does he? So, yeah, paranormal, certainly, to these folks. Acupuncture, I went through the medical program at University of Miami primarily to become a microbiologist and immunologist. I am a disciple of science. I consider myself a follower of the scientific methodologies and principles. I am not a conspiracy theorist. When I finished college, I became a special agent in counterintelligence, focusing on national security crimes, so terrorism and espionage and insurgencies and whatnot. So I've always been very fact-based, just the facts man kind of guy, to be honest with you. I remember in college, professors telling me that acupuncture was some sort of Eastern type medicine that really didn't do anything. It was just a bunch of speculation, and it was all in your head. Turns out that now the Department of Veterans Affairs actually prescribes acupuncture to some of our wounded warriors, right? It's not paranormal. It's just science. Tonic immobility, hypnotizing chickens, right? Yeah, I know, we heard it all before. That's why I put this picture up here. It's a little humorous. In reality, it's no different than when a shark is in its natural environment. You flip it over, it kind of goes to sleep, kind of goes into this catatonic state. Same thing with alligators. It's biology, isn't it? It's not paranormal. It's biology. It's just reality. It's just the way we're wired. So in this part of the conversation, I'd like to, before we get into the nuts and bolts of UAP, have you consider a few things. We live in an incomprehensibly large universe. And I mean incomprehensible. We're going to get into a little bit of that now. But also, the way we perceive and the way we interact with the very universe that we live in is limited. We have 5 fundamental senses for us to gauge and navigate within our environment. And if you can't touch it, taste it, hear it, smell it, etc., we have no idea it's there. We can't interact with it, in fact. So let's talk about some of that. The visible light spectrum is a very, very narrow sliver of the electromagnetic spectrum, we call it visible light, for which we see the universe. This is important because look at that number on the bottom. 0.0035% of the magnetic spectrum is within the visible light spectrum. What does that mean? We can only perceive less than 1% of 1%. Meaning most of reality lies beyond our ability to perceive it. If you had the ability to look at the world through cell phone vision and look at the world through Wi-Fi and G5 and GPS, you would see an entirely different reality all around you. Where I live in Wyoming, we have these beautiful unoccluded skies. 300 days out of the year, you can sit there and look at all the stars in the heavens. And as beautiful as that is, if you look at that same part of the sky through a radio telescope, you will see something different. You will see nebula. You will see things that we cannot normally perceive, and that's important. This is a photograph in the visible light spectrum versus infrared, just one sliver down on the electromagnetic spectrum. Look at the difference, right? That's where the universe really lies. We can't perceive it because we're so limited in our ability to perceive nature and our reality. It's just the way we're built. Then you have the other issue, size and scale. Remember, I said we live in an incredibly, incomprehensibly complex and large universe. This is important because most of the universe we will never have the ability to interact with. So what do I mean? That little dot there, anybody know what that is? Anybody? That's right. Earth, sorry, the words got cut off up there. That's Earth from the Cassini probe, that little blue dot. You want to really get humbled? Google pale blue dot. It is a picture taken by the Voyager as it was leaving our solar system, and what you see is in the vastest inky blackness, this tiny little, maybe 2 pixels wide, little blue dot. What that is every person that ever lived, every moment in history, every fear, every love, every war, anybody who has ever lived in the history of the world lived and died on that little dot. That's it. Everything and everyone. So think about that, because even in the vastness of space, when we turn our telescopes, our space telescopes, to look at a particularly dark part of the sky, where there are no stars, there are no galaxies, it's just inky blackness. And so when we turn our telescopes to those parts of the sky, what do we see? We see that. And by the way, those aren't stars, folks. Those are galaxies with hundreds of billions of stars in each one. I put this slide up here to illustrate for you our visible universe. And I'm emphasizing visible universe versus the rest of the universe. That's right. There's a bigger universe out there than our visible universe. So our visible universe, we can count 200 sextillion stars. What number is that? That's like trying to imagine Google. How do you rationalize that? So let me put this in simpler terms. There are more stars in the observable universe than there are grains of sand in all the beaches in all the world. Think about that. And that's just our visible universe. That's just 10%, maybe less, of what scientists believe is the actual size of the universe. So what does that mean? How big is the actual universe? Well, at a minimum, it's that. Now, what's a light year? I have the thing up there, the words light year. Light year is the time it takes a photon of light to travel in a year. So how fast does light travel? 186,000 miles per second. 7.5 times around this planet in a second. Now, imagine how far it can go in a year. Now, imagine how far it could go in 13.9 billion years, right? That's just our observable universe. Roughly 40 billion light years across, when the reality is that the universe is much, much bigger. So, what does that mean? Well, believe it or not, we're going to get to something even more fascinating. Because as big as the universe is, it's also very, very small. So how many of you took high school chemistry? Remember Avogadro's number? Look at that order of magnitude. 1 times 10 to the negative 23. The other one was 1 times 4 point something times 10 to the 26. Roughly the same order of magnitude. This is a hydrogen molecule, proton, neutron, and electron, compared to the human body. It's roughly the same order of magnitude, folks, meaning inside every single human being is in scale an equal amount of space. That atom is to us as we are to the universe. And we sit right in the middle, roughly, of this scale of proportions. And we as human beings can only interact 1 order of magnitude up or down for the most part. Otherwise, the universe is simply too big or too small for us to interact with. And yet, that's where most of reality actually lies. It's not here with us, it's out there. All right, so ATIP. Now that the quizzing is over, let's talk a little bit about the program I was part of, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And this is important because I want to preface here a lot of the findings that ATIP was able to develop and eventually came forward with are the results of many, many hours of some very, very smart people, some of the world's premier rocket scientists, physicists, theoretical physicists, astrophysicists, surgeons, and doctors. Okay? So this is not world according to Lou Elizondo. I just want to preface that. So what do we look at? This is the actual contract focus of OSAP and ATIP. OSAP was the beginning of ATIP. What you see in the background is a little bit of an Easter egg for you. It's the actual contract that your taxpayer dollars paid for. Now let me highlight a couple of things here. People say, oh, ATIP was looking at aircraft 40 years in the future. Wrong. Look at this bullet here. Investigate legitimacy of currently observed phenomenon. Does that sound like aircraft 40 years in the future to you? No. It's always been about UAP. So don't let anybody fool you. Say, well, they really weren't looking at UFOs. Yes, we were. And we were using your money to do it. Yep. Why was it so important for the intelligence community, the CIA, NSA, the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, the services like the Navy, to be involved in the topic of UFOs? Especially if they're not real, right? Why would we care? Well, because we do care. And there's some very significant attributes that UAP display that from a national security perspective are extremely, extremely important. So let's talk about the 4 observables. I'm sorry the bottom of the slide here is getting a little cut off, but the first one is instantaneous acceleration. What is that? The ability to change your velocity quickly. So to put that into contrast, a human being can withstand about 9 G forces for a very short period of time while wearing a G suit before we start experiencing negative biological consequences, things like blackouts, redouts, and ultimately death. In comparison, the General Dynamics F-16 Fighting Falcon, older aircraft, but still one of the most highly maneuverable manned aircraft we have in our inventory, can pull about 17, 18 Gs at the unclassified level before you start having structural issues, meaning wings begin to snap off and the plane, literally the airframe, begins to disintegrate while you're flying it. Now in contrast, what are we seeing with UAP? We're seeing objects that can pull not tens of Gs, but 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 G forces. Think about that for a minute. Think about that type of capability and maneuverability. Do you think the US government would be interested in being able to replicate that? You're darn right. Next one is hypersonic velocity. What is hypersonics? We hear those words in supersonic. Hypersonic is defined as 5 times the speed of sound. So roughly 768 miles an hour at sea level, multiplied by 5. That is the speed of sound. Mach 1. We're talking 5 times that, at least Mach 5. Now, do we have technologies in our inventory that can fly at hypersonic? Sure. Let's take the Lockheed YF-12A SR-71, otherwise known as the Blackbird. At the unclassified level, it can fly around 3,200 miles an hour. But when the SR-71, the Blackbird, wants to take a right-hand turn, it takes roughly half the state of Ohio to do that. That's not what we're seeing. We're seeing objects not doing 3,000, 4,000, but doing 10,000, 13,000 miles an hour and able to execute an immediate right-hand turn or a 180-degree turn. We don't have that. Then you have low observability. Actually, you know what? Let's go to transmedium travel real quick. Low observability. Transmedium travel is the ability to operate in multiple, what we call the military domains. It's just environments, right? Think of a seaplane. A seaplane can fly and a seaplane can float. But let's face it, a seaplane is neither a really good airplane or a really good boat. Why? Well, because it's a design and performance compromise. The more environments you want to work in, the more you have to sacrifice performance and designs to do it. That's why the space shuttle was never a really good airplane. It went to space, but it kind of came down like a brick, and you better hope you were able to get it to the runway the first time. It's a design compromise. And yet that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing these objects that have the ability to fly and go underwater and even encounter them in low Earth orbit without the associated performance compromise or the design compromise. Right? So how are they doing that? Is that an interest of the US government? Absolutely it is. Right? Low observability. We spend tens of millions and billions of dollars in some cases on a single platform. Take the B-2 bomber, take the Valkyrie, right? We spend lots of money just trying to lower the radar cross-section even a little bit, just so we are less observable. And yet, what we hear from the pilots over and over again is like, Lou, it's hard. I got this weird nonsensical return on the radar. It looked like it was trying to jam me, and then when I looked at it, it's hard to describe. You know, I know the difference between an Su-22 and a MiG-25 and an F-18, but I've never seen anything like this. In fact, it's hard to describe because it didn't have wings. Didn't have a tail, rudder, ailerons, elevators, control surfaces, leading edge, trailing edge. I've never seen anything like that in my life. I don't know how to describe it. Right? So low observability is very important. And last but not least, biological effects, which we'll talk about, but not yet in this particular slide. We're going to go a few slides more, and we're going to hold that for the rest, for the remainder. And then anti-gravity. The ability to defy the natural effects of Earth's gravitational pull. So what is gravity? We often think that gravity is like apple falling from the tree. That's not gravity. That is an effect of gravity. As we know with Einstein, that was a Newtonian model of gravity. As we now know with Einstein, gravity is actually the warping of space-time. The warping of space-time based upon one of two things, either lots of mass or lots of energy. So for example, we're all on Earth and we all experience gravity, because the mass of Earth is pulling us down as warping space-time. So we're going to get into a little bit of that. There's a reason why this is important, because what we see, anti-gravity, there's only three ways we know how to defy Earth's gravity. Let me just put this out there real quick. The first is through the fundamentals of flight. There's four forces: thrust, lift, drag, and weight. And if you understand those, you can build wings and you can fly for as long as you got fuel. The other way we know how to defy Earth's gravity is through something called buoyancy. Right? Think of a hot air balloon, think of a helium balloon, a kid's Mylar balloon. You have a cavity where inside that cavity the density is less than outside, and therefore that object will rise to a state of equilibrium. The last way we know how to defy Earth's gravity is through something called ballistics. Force equals mass times acceleration. If you put enough energy behind something, you can make it defy Earth's gravity. So think of an ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile, right? Or think about me throwing, I don't know, a baseball. That's ballistics, right? It goes up with enough energy and then eventually comes down. But that's not what we're seeing. These things don't have any obvious signs of propulsion. They don't have any of the associated technologies like wings that we need to fly, or even heat signatures. So how are they doing it? Is that important from a military perspective and an intelligence perspective? Absolutely it is. So let's talk about that. Why are they important? So, for example, if you know how to do instantaneous acceleration, you can create military capabilities that can outperform your adversaries using things like thrust vectoring, right, G-force protection, and high maneuverability. They can't hit you if you get out of the way. How about hypersonics? There's some of the reasons, right? You can get in, you can get out faster, you can do your job, and chances are the enemy's not going to get a chance to see you. You have the element of surprise. Low observability, well, anonymity. If you want to go do something and you don't want to be caught, you want to be able to have stealth. Survivability, you want to be able to go there and survive the mission in the first place. right? These are just some of the examples you can see from a national security perspective why these performance characteristics are so important. Transmedium travel, here's some more advantages, right? You have the ability to do something nobody else can do. You can fly underwater and then pop out into the atmosphere and continue to fly. So there's some very specific advantages to being able to replicate this. And of course, anti-gravity, right? Flight precision, loiterability, all sorts of wonderful things that we have the opportunity to do, hopefully ahead of our adversaries. So this is a national security issue, and don't be fooled, your government is very interested in this. And so what ATIP did, and OSAP, was commission some academic studies through some of the best and brightest and most renowned organizations and institutions in the world. And so we did 37 academic studies trying to figure out the exotic technologies responsible for UAP flight performance. Here's some of them. Now, if you think these look like aircraft type studies, they're not. Just take a look at some of these types here. Positron aerospace propulsion, biomaterials, metallic spintronics. Here's a good one, number 18. Traversable wormholes, stargates, and negative energy. That's right. You paid for it. Here's a few others. 25. An introduction to the statistical Drake equation. Who knows what the Drake equation is? Raise your hands. Good. So the Drake equation is an equation, a mathematical formula that attempts to try to identify the statistical likelihood of life, intelligent life in other planets. We're not talking about airplanes. We're just not. And here's the last of the list of the 37 studies that we did. What we were trying to do was identify the different exotic technologies necessary to replicate the 5 observables. That's what those were. And it wasn't until 2015 that we in ATIP had the proverbial aha moment. And we're going to talk about that. By the way, again, this wasn't my revelation. These were our scientists and our physicists who barged into my office, by the way, in the middle of a meeting, kind of got me in trouble, and said, "Lou, we need to talk to you now." I'm like, "Oh, I'm a little busy." "No, you got to come now." And so I did. So for 3 hours, I went into a skiff, and they began to write down this monstrosity of a mathematical formula. For the record, I got up to Calc 3, and I thought I was going to die. So I'm not, math is only a minor of mine, and I wasn't very good at it. These guys were talking about mathematics well beyond my comprehension. But the bottom line is that they had the aha moment, and all the scientists realized that every single one of the observables may be a manifestation of a single technology. One, not 37, one. And it has to do with gravity. It has to do with gravity. What is gravity? Well, gravity, like I said, Newton versus Einstein, it's the warping of space-time. And in fact, here on Earth, we all experience it equally. Gravity on Earth affects us all 9.8 meters per second squared. 9.8 meters per second, which means because of the mass of Earth, that is how we feel gravity. In fact, if you're on the moon, it'd be less. And if you're on Jupiter, it'd be more. And ultimately, if you're like near a black hole, it'd be a lot more. And space-time is funny because it's stretchable and compressible. It's not the way we think space-time is. So the aha moment was, hey, look, if you had the ability to put a bubble around you to insulate yourself from the effects of Earth's gravity, all sorts of stuff would magically happen. First of all, you wouldn't need wings to fly. You wouldn't need propulsion because gravity doesn't affect you the same way. But it also does some other very interesting things. And it turns out that all the observables wind up being possible. Let's talk about them a little bit. Before we get into the shapes and whatnot, because it turns out that it may even explain the shapes of craft. Who knew? Gravity is one of those things that If you want proof it's compressible and it's relative and it's stretchable, one only has to look at a GPS satellite. So in the early days of GPS, we had a ground station with an atomic cesium clock, and we had a satellite with an atomic GPS satellite with an atomic cesium clock, identical to each other. So they should run at the same rate. But after a week, we were getting frustrated because we noticed the clocks were running at a different rate. How is that possible if they're the exact same clock with the exact same amount of atomic decay? It doesn't make sense. It turns out that the ground station with that clock was running at a different rate because it was closer to Earth's mass. It was being perturbed. Clocks were running at a different rate than the spacecraft's atomic cesium clock because of what we call atomic drift. That is a result of the warping of space-time. The closer you get to a massive object, the more you experience that warping of space-time. All right, so what about UAPs and the shapes? Well, let me get to this next slide here, if I can. There we go, okay. It turns out that this theory that they had at ATIP and this unifying theory that is really all about anti-gravity explains a whole lot of the observations out there and may even explain why UFOs are shaped the way they're shaped. Now, this is actually kind of a big breakthrough, I think, for ATIP. You notice that people describe things as lenticular craft or saucer shape. They describe them as cigar shape. They describe them as triangles and even boomerangs, right? Well, why? Why are they these shapes? Well, let's take a notional idea here. You see a little person on the far left side of the screen, typically 6 feet. If you had the ability to create that bubble to insulate you from Earth's gravity, there's two ways to do it. A lot of mass or really a lot of energy. And we know that because of Einstein's equation, E equals mc squared. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. What does that actually translate to? Well, you can think of mass and energy as being coefficients or being the same thing but in fundamentally different states. They're coefficients of each other. Think of mass as ice, a block of ice. It's hard, it's tangible, you can touch it. Think of energy as steam. They're both water, but they're in fundamentally different states. If you take matter and you annihilate it, what do you get? You get pure energy. If you take energy, you condense it, slow it down, you start getting into subatomic particles. So they have a very intimate relationship. And this is important because to create that bubble, you can either do it with a lot of mass, which we know they're not doing because it would perturb Earth's gravity. So they're probably doing it with a lot of energy and special material, which we can certainly get into. And so let's say hypothetically you have the ability to create this bubble around you, 360 degrees all around, that insulates you from the effects of Earth's gravity. What is the only shape in geometry, think of a diving bell, if I wanted to protect myself inside of a car or a vehicle or a craft and make sure I was surrounded equally on all sides? Well, it'd be a sphere, wouldn't it? But let's face it, if you put a sphere on the ground, what happens? It kind of rolls around. It's not overly efficient. So what you could do is do a two-dimensional representation of a sphere, which is what? Well, it turns out it is a disk. And it may explain why the disks tend to be smaller. They have a single propulsion unit in the middle. It interacts with the skin, that energy, and creates this bubble that insulates yourself from the effects of Earth's warping of space-time. The problem is, to generate this type of energy could be problematic. In fact, it might even be downright dangerous. If you go to the Navy and you ask a Navy commander, how many nuclear propulsion units do you put on a ship? Their answer is simple. They say as few as possible. Because when something goes wrong, it goes really wrong, right? So you want to keep these down to a minimum. So let's say this bubble is, 43 feet. But you need, like a growing family. You can put maybe 3 people in a little sports car, but the family's growing. I've got a problem. I've outgrown the sport model. I need something a little bigger. Well, turns out, using this model, I could put 2 of these together, kind of in a chain. Think of the top right picture there of 2 bubbles coming together, right? These 2 bubble makers, and put 2 of these discs together. But what is that? Well, it's kind of like a cigar, isn't it? It's a rod. So if you put 2 of these propulsion units at the end of each side of the rod, one on each side, you can still do the same thing and have the same type of protection that you do with a smaller saucer in the middle, right? So that's a much bigger thing. Usually they're reported as being much larger than the discs, about 100, 120 feet. Think of a school bus, a big school bus. But you know what? I got the in-laws coming in now. I got a bigger vehicle. Okay, so what do I do then? Well, it turns out that there's a solution for that. While keeping the number of power units to a minimum, there is only one shape and geometry that allows me economy of scale to maximize my real estate, my surface area, while maintaining a minimum number of propulsion units. So if I go out 90 degrees from the middle of that, think of a three-legged stool. Now I've got three bubbles. What is that? Triangle, that's right. It's a triangle. And if you notice, the reports are from these triangles that there are these luminous lights from the apex of the triangles. They're lights, though they're not lights. Chances are they're actually propulsion units. And what you are witnessing is what we call a Doppler redshift blue shift. Energy that is coming out in the electromagnetic spectrum, maybe in soft X-ray, when it leaves that bubble, is actually being Doppler shifted up, blue shifted up into the visible light spectrum. And that is what we see. Now, how does that explain those some things like low observability? Well, let's look at this bubble for a second. If light is coming from the sun at a certain frequency and hits this bubble, think of a koi fish pond. You ever look at a koi fish or maybe goldfish at the bottom of a pond? They appear kind of wavy and distorted. Well, they're not wavy and distorted. That's our perception. Because light, once it hits the water surface, is being reflected and refracted in a way that when it comes back to us, it appears distorted. And that may explain the same thing with radar coming from some of our pilots. They say, you know, the weird thing, Lou, I'm hitting it banging it with radar, but it's coming back like it's being spoofed, like if it's being somehow being messed with, it's being jammed. In reality, that's probably not the case. What's happening is that the frequency of radar emission coming from the radar system, when it gets into that bubble, what goes in is not the same frequency that gets bounced back to the radar system, because you're looking at inside that bubble a different space-time. And it turns out, if I need a really big craft, right, I can always do a triangle and put one more bubble in the middle. And that's why some of the really big triangles you might hear is being described as having a fourth light in the middle. And it's probably part of the propulsion unit, it's probably part of the actual science on how these things are flying. It is probably not light. And there's another shape. Very rare, but think of Phoenix lights, right? After this triangle, you lose economy of scale. There are no more shapes in geometry that allow you to minimize the number of propulsion units while maximizing your space. In essence, you just got to put them in a daisy chain. And what does that look like? Looks like a boomerang. And all the little lights they see stringed there, they're probably propulsion units. So it turns out that what ATIP had managed to figure out, our scientists, and that all this is related somehow to bubble makers, anti-gravity, actually checks the blocks and answers every single one of the observables. Now remember we talked a little bit about biological effects. I tell you I was going to wait for a little bit, right? There it is. How does this explain biological effects? Well, think of a microwave oven, right? A lot of energy coming out, but now think about a microwave oven without a door. Okay, that's probably what we're dealing with. The energy required to juice up a craft and create this bubble is enormous. So if I get too close to it, what happens? Well, some people come back and say, you know, I've got this red, looks like a sunburn. Well, it is. It's probably UV radiation burn. That's what it is. And then if they get even closer than that, by the way, we've got a lot of patients, military and intelligence officers that have been injured by these. By the way, that story's going to come out. Wait till that comes out. they start reporting these other things. They start getting diagnosed with internal organ damage, consistent with some sort of directed energy type weapon. So issues like the quadriputamin, they're having organ failure, heart failure. There are 2 people right now, I don't know if maybe you know this, maybe you don't. There are 2 individuals right now, former military, that are on 100% disability from the US government, and it is in writing why they are. It's because of Rendlesham, because it got too close to a UAP. And your government put them on 100% medical disability with the help of, by the way, former Senator from Arizona, John McCain, because the Air Force didn't want to release the records to the victims, the individuals. And it wasn't until the senator got involved and forced them to declassify the medical records that they admit, the Air Force, yes, these guys were cops, they were working for us, they got too close to something, and now they are on 100% disability because of it. I have seen the paperwork myself, so wait till that comes out. And of course, Zone 3. You get too close to this thing when it's really juiced up, and you hear these stories where the pilot might say, Lou was crazy, I'm flying, and it felt like 5 minutes went by. But when I looked at my watch, 30 minutes went by, but I only used 5 minutes of fuel. How is that possible? Well, the theory is that this event horizon around the bubble isn't a hard terminus. It's actually a soft terminus, meaning the closer you get to the craft, the more you might start to begin to experience space-time relative to inside the bubble than outside the bubble. So very, very, very fascinating. And a lot of people will claim it was deliberate. It's probably not. You know, if I go to an airport and I jump on a 737 to Honolulu, probably nothing's bad is going to happen to me. But if now I go on the tarmac, that same airport, and I put my head behind the jet